Hello, this is Ailsa McLellan's seaweed talk for the Martin Seaweed Festival. Thank you very much for asking me to talk to you about kelp. This is obviously my recorded COVID contingency version, but I hope to see some actual people in real life on Isle Martin in September. My background is in marine science, and since graduating, I have worked in a variety of marine jobs, from trying to make fish farmers get on better with river owners or fishermen get on better with each other, to the more peaceful pursuits of modelling sewage plumes, farming oysters and surveying seaweed. Currently, I'm mainly campaigning for better treatment of our seabed and the habitats and the species that rely on it, which of course includes us lot. I've been asked to speak about the kelp dredging campaign, which I'm going to set in the context of Scotland's really terrible inshore fisheries management. If I start with fish and then we move on to kelp, hopefully by the time we get to the seaweed, you will understand why I do not believe we can trust our government on their current trajectory to be sensible around kelp dredging pilots or trials, let alone a full-blown dredge industry. So here I've found a lovely picture of cod in kelp, and that is good to remind us that everything is interlinked. Cod and kelp and us, and if you pull one thread, the whole thing unravels. Firstly, I don't like fisheries management as a term, as it makes people feel that if they aren't fishermen, they don't have the right to a say. But the sea and everything in it is our common resource, and it is not there for the benefit of any one sector. Neither should it be managed as such. Fisheries management should be called habitat management, not just the habitat of the creatures that rely on a healthy seabed, but because of the sea's vital role in climatic regulation, which of course is impacting the habitat of every single one of us. Fisheries management in Scotland, as I've already said, but it bears repeating, is terrible. It has allowed the devastation of habitats and carbon sinks. It has damaged food security, and it's made it harder for folk like you and I to go out in our dinghy to catch a fish for our dinner. Successive governments have just sat and twiddled their thumbs as the situation has gone from bad to worse, and have done nothing effective to turn things around. They talk a really good game, but this isn't translating into action or recovery. Until 1984, we had a 3-mile limit on bottom trawling in Scotland. This had been imposed almost 100 years prior, as fishermen were concerned that this developing fishery was impacting nursery grounds and fish stocks. That limit was removed by Margaret Thatcher's government because it was becoming impossible to police, and there was increasing pressure from fishermen keen to exploit this rich inshore fishing ground as the stocks outside of 3 miles were falling. Predictably, there was a short boom as rich inshore waters were ram raided, and then one almighty bust as habitats were destroyed by heavy gear being dragged along the seabed. High levels of bycatch were caught along with the target species. So this slide and the next two are from the paper Ecological Meltdown in the Firth of Clyde by Thurston and Roberts. It shows what happened to cod in the Clyde. You can see their numbers were fluctuating a bit and then have completely crashed. As if that wasn't bad enough, you can see here that the situation is mirrored across all of the main fish stocks in the Clyde. This situation in the Clyde is a microcosm of what happened all around Scotland's coasts and indeed globally. Currently on Scotland's west coast, the vast majority of fishermen are almost solely dependent on shellfish, right down there at the bottom of the food chain. That's what's left. So where have all the fish gone? This shows fishermen numbers. So the current situation with fisheries management is good for absolutely no one in the long term. It's not just fish stocks that have been devastated. Our government has been implementing a network of marine protected areas for around 10 years, which sounds great, but there is an absolutely huge chasm between what our politicians are telling us and what has been done in reality. We are lucky here in Ullapool as our local MP excludes scallop dredging. Many marine protected areas have absolutely no protective measures in place at all. even those where the scientific advice has been to exclude mobile bottom-dragged fishing gear to protect whatever has been identified as precious on the seabed. Government ministers routinely state that Scotland has 37% protection of our seabed, but that is absolutely not true. It is designated, not protected. The sad truth is that less than 5% of our inshore seabed has legal protection from bottom-towed fishing gear, and there is a vast body of evidence that shows that that tiny, paltry 5% is still being illegally targeted. This pictures here on the slide show what scallop dredging does to the seabed. It levels rich three-dimensional habitats to flat gravels. It can cause sediments to release carbon, and it leaves creatures smashed and dying on the seabed. I do not believe for 1 minute that the majority of people would stand for this if they could see what was happening. Most of the shellfish that are caught in this way are exported abroad. So I don't really need to say much more about fisheries management because the Scottish Government's own information says it pretty well itself. This is from the Scottish Marine Assessment from last year, and it shows what's happened to the priority marine features. So these are the ones that are a priority, and kelp is another priority marine feature. This is in the last 10 years since the advent of MPAs and the National Marine Plan. The declines are caused by more than one thing, but physical disturbance from fishing gear is a factor. I'm sure anybody would agree that these declines are absolutely catastrophic. And clearly we can't afford to wait another 10 years for change, or there's going to be nothing left. So now to seaweed. I love seaweed and I love hanging out in the intertidal zone, which has always been a really happy place for me. And I'm lucky to be able to call my urge to pluter about in the rock pools work. You'll have heard from Professor Juliet Brodie about the wonders of kelp. I'm going to say a tiny bit here. There's a really horrible term called ecosystem services, which is to try and quantify the monetary value of habitats as if they have no intrinsic value of their own. But if you're trying to persuade politicians that something warrants protection, then ecosystem services is a useful term. So here are some of the ecosystem services of kelp. Like many seabed habitats, kelp is a carbon sink, and given the current planetary situation, we should be preserving and recovering all of the carbon sinks that we can. I just want to quickly say here that humble mud, the marine mud in our sea lochs, alone, so that's forgetting the carbon sinks like merle, kelp and seagrass, that mud sinks more carbon than Scotland's forests, peats and terrestrial soils combined. So protecting the seaweed, protecting the seabed is really, it's not something that we should be arguing about, it's something we should be getting on with doing. Anyway, back to the kelp. The ability of kelp to dissipate wave action really matters if you live somewhere low-lying like Tiree, Uist or Call. And with climate change bringing more stormy weather and sea level rise, this service is needed more now than ever. In Long Island, where natural kelp beds disappeared, they've actually stuck plastic strips into the sea to try and dissipate the wave energy. I'm sure you'll agree that it is better that we preserve the real stuff. Stormcast kelp is a dune stabiliser, and it's an important food source for invertebrates, birds and animals, especially in the winter. And our seas are becoming more acidic because of climate change, which is impacting the ability of marine creatures to create shells and skeletons. It has been found that kelp can ameliorate this rising acidity. Kelp is the cradle of life. We can't overstate this point. The kelp beds are the rainforests of the sea, and kelp is at the bottom of a very complex food web. Marine tourism makes more money for the Scottish economy than fishing, and I'm assuming these tourists want to see life in the sea and not just a blue sheet. So it stands to reason that a healthy ecosystem is good for tourism. So from this, I get that we dredge for kelp at our peril, but that did not stop an alginate company from trying to gain permission to be the first to commercially dredge for kelp in Scotland. So in August 2018, I was handpicking seaweed with a view to farming it. All seaweeds taste and act very differently, and I wanted to know what there was a market for and what was doable. I picked weed from a friend's mussel lines, and I had a commercial licence from the Crown Estate to harvest in beautiful Garvey Bay. I followed some rightly strict rules set out by the Crown Estate and Nature Scot. These were included, but were not limited to, that no seaweed should be cut in a way that kills the individual plant, that I must collect no more than 1/3 of each individual plant, that I must avoid taking bycatch, for example, blue-reed limpets, which live on the kelp, that I must consider coastal erosion and avoid sensitive areas such as near merle or seal haulouts. I must not denude entire patches. So you can see in that wee picture at the top that I would walk out to the site, cut with scissors what I could carry in that yellow bag, which is not very much, with wet seaweed and a fair hike over a Scottish quagmire back to my car. At the same time as this, I obtained a licence for a trial seaweed farm to the north of Isle Martin. I can remember with horrible clarity when John Aitchison from the Coastals Community Network drew my attention to the kelp dredge application, which was slipping through the system under the radar with only 2 weeks left for responses to the application. It was really like a kick in the guts. So to start with, kelp dredging has never been licensed in Scotland. Of course, it has been harvested in the past for use as fertiliser and human and animal food. You can still see the stripes on the hills around Ullapool of the run rig system, where people hauled seaweed up steep hills as they struggled to get enough fertility into the soil to grow their crops. I'll leave the rest of the kelp history to Cathy Dagg, as I am no historian. So anyway, in August 2018, this alginate company called Marine Biopolymers submitted a scoping report to Marine Scotland, outlining their plans to be the first to dredge for Laminaria hyperborea, which is the kelp that grows at the lowest extent of the low spring tides. It's got quite a stiff stipe or stalk, so you can see it standing up like little palm trees in the water. The method that MBL wanted to use was the same as is used in other countries such as Norway, and involves this dredge hauling the entire plant up by the holdfast, along with all the life associated with it. They just wanted the stipe, so the fronds and the holdfast were going to be chucked over the side, where there was a clear possibility of adjacent habitats such as merle being smothered, as had taken place in areas where kelp dredging already happens. They wanted 34,000 tonnes by year 4 of their plan, and you got to remember that that's just 34,000 tonnes of stipe. There would be another 34,000 tonnes of holdfast and frond wasted over the side in this process. They stated that this could be the start of a significant kelp dredge industry in Scotland, as if that was a good thing, and they also said there would be jobs, the number of which went up and up as our campaign progressed. As if all of this was not horrible enough, the Scottish Government appeared to be incredibly supportive. These choice snippets are from a letter dated the 31st of July 2017, thanking someone from an alginate company for a meeting in Victoria Quay. That's where Marine Scotland are based. I'll just read a couple because it makes my blood boil. Your innovative proposal chimes well with Scottish Government's top priority of growing the economy. We fully recognise the economic potential. This is a priority for us. We will support companies and individuals seeking to operate in this area. As you know, this work has begun and a major exercise is already underway, mapping locations and quantities of kelp around Scotland. This map shows what they termed potential dredge blocks. No local communities had been consulted. Number 1 at the top there is Garvey Bay, which is fishing ground for local creelers, smack bang over the snorkel trail that Noel and the Scottish Wildlife Trust had just set up. And of course, in the same place as I was snipping away with my scissors, trying to avoid blue-reed limpets and trying to avoid doing any harm. Here's one of the blue-reed limpets I was carefully avoiding as per instructions. Not a possibility for a kelp dredger as it goes about its business denuding all over the place. So we've talked about the ecosystem services of kelp. Well, you are reducing them if you dredge it, and that is for certain. You also get less fish where there's less kelp. This study found over 90% less young gadoids, which is things like cod, haddock, pollock, in a dredged area than a non-dredged area. You are perhaps permanently altering the ecosystem. Kelp's global range is shrinking, and indeed all around the world and closer to home in places like Sussex, people are trying desperately to restore lost kelp beds. Kelp doesn't always grow back. The recovery or not of the kelp depends on a lot of factors. It includes urchin barrens, where the fish that predate on urchins have moved on due to lack of their kelp habitat. Urchin numbers can then explode. They are grazers and they will graze down the kelp, preventing regrowth. Dredging also destabilises the seabed, so the more mobile grits and sands can cause scouring, which again prohibits regrowth. The kelp can also be outcompeted by faster growing algae species. So here's the deal. You can farm kelp. It's farmed all over the world, in Norway, the Faroes, Ireland, America. Trials at various marine labs in Scotland have shown it's possible. Anybody with a mooring rope knows it's possible. Sure, it is not as quick or as cheap or as easy as dredging up the wild stuff that belongs to the Scottish people, but nobody got the right to take that. Marine biopolymers argued that they couldn't get the best quality alginate from farmed kelp because the stipes were not old enough and they hadn't had to withstand the prolonged year of wave smashing that the wild stuff has had to endure, which is how it builds up the good grade of alginate that they wanted to. So here's an idea for these guys. Instead of wreaking havoc on one more ecosystem, why not apply your giant boffin brains to working out a way of farming that does give you the alginate of the quality that you need? This picture is from a seaweed farm owned by the wonderful Kate Burns near Rathlin Island. She has got issues with trying to stop laminaria, hyperborea, self-seeding amongst the types of seaweed that she's trying to grow. So, like many lunatics before me in times of great duress, I took to Facebook. I posted on my own page about the application, and from response, I quickly realised that many more folk than me were outraged. I started a dedicated No Kelp Dredge Facebook page to share information. Momentum grew, and an incredible amount of people from around Scotland's coasts took action. Over 2,300 people wrote to Marine Scotland, saying that this shouldn't happen. And that was fishermen, scientists, kids. You could read some of the responses online and it was very moving. 27,000 people signed a petition, and over 200 coastal businesses employing more than 2,000 people between them signed an open letter to Rosanna Cunningham asking her to refuse the licence. High-profile scientists and celebrities took the Kelp's corner, and they gave us statements to use in the campaign. And these included Professor Juliette Brodie, who I hope you will have heard from during this festival, the research leader and merit researcher of phycology. Phycology is CBD science at the Natural History Museum. Arthur Dow, former environmental advisor to the UN, who's also got a background in phycology and a doctorate in marine algae ecology. Sir David Attenborough, who needs no introduction, and Adam Nicholson, who's the acclaimed author of A Seabird's Cry and The Sea Room. And also I'm currently reading The Sea is Not Made of Water, which is a really beautiful book. Also Sarah Redmond, who is a recognised leader in seaweed aquaculture. Thanks to the Sea Savers' schmoozing abilities, we also had a lot of celebrity backing, including such legends as Lewis Capaldi, George Monbiot, Billy Bragg, and indeed the Crankies. And the Ullapool Primary School came out fighting. Now, the terrible thing is, despite all of that, we might not have managed to stop this application apart from one stroke of luck. At the same time as the dredging proposal had been submitted, the Crown Estate Scotland Bill was devolving management to Scotland and was under review. This gave Mark Ruskell the opportunity to ask for an amendment, which meant that seaweed would have to just be picked in the way that it is now, with nothing being killed and the habitat not being altered. The amendment was voted through and became incorporated properly into the Crown Estate Bill on the 15th of January. None of this would have been possible without such hard work and support from Mark Ruskell, Claudia Beamish, John Finney and Gail Ross, a really lovely example of people from different parties working together with a clear goal. None of it would have been possible without the coastal communities either, who all ganged up. So I wish I could end this on a happy note, but I can't. After Rosanna Cunningham passed the bill to protect kelp, many people said through gritted teeth, she stated that we needed a seaweed harvest review, and a group was quickly formed, and they have met a number of times. To begin with, they had a chart timetabling kelp dredge trials for summer 2019. They have since took it off their website following unwanted negative attention. But you can see on their website that they have not taken kelp dredging off the table. What's wrong with a trial, you might ask? Well, I'll tell you what's wrong with a trial overseen by this government. This is an example of a current trial that's underway. In Scotland, we had widespread illegal electrofishing for razorfish or spoots, which was extremely lucrative, and Marine Scotland couldn't control it. So they sought a derogation from the EU in 2018 to set up a scientific trial. They were granted that, even though it is illegal in other EU states. The trial started in February 2018. It is open-ended. It involved no baseline study on the seabed being electrofished. It didn't and it isn't researching what happens if you remove large quantities of spoots from the seabed, though some divers think that they provide a vital role in maintaining seabed stability. There seems to be no research underway into the collateral damage to other benthic species that live in the seabed, and it seems that the information being gathered is on the spoots themselves and not on the environmental impact. So, back to the kelp. What's to be gained from a pilot study? There is no doubt that dredging kelp can only reduce what is good. It reduces the ecosystem services that I have banged on about. Habitat, carbon sink, coastal protector, acidity regulator, all impacted, all lessened. It is not a question of whether kelp dredging will damage ecosystems. We know it will. It's a question of how much. And whether kelp dredging goes ahead or not will be decided by somebody somewhere making a call on what that destruction is worth in monetary terms to somebody else. In conclusion, their track record shows that we can't trust our government to manage our inshore waters for the benefit of people or planet. Currently, they are being systematically asset stripped. There is hope though, and I get that hope from the communities, not government. It's communities that are making a difference. It's community projects that are driving restoration projects to recover lost and damaged habitats like oyster and seagrass beds. It's up to us, the people, to fight for the protection and recovery of our inshore ecosystems for the sake of future generations and our lovely watery planet. So thank you very much for listening to me. If you want to take any action, you could visit our seas.scot, where there's more information about protecting the seabed, and there's a petition and a mail shot action on there. And please get in touch with me if you want to talk about any of this. And this is a list of the references I used. Thank you very much.